Which wide receivers should be in your lineup or on your bench for week 2 of the fantasy football season? We're going to go game by game and talk about all the players that you need to know about. Now, there are some receivers you don't need to worry. These are must starts regardless of the matchup. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, T. Higgins, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Chris Olave, and Devontae Adams. All right, we're going to get to those matchups and talk about all the receivers that you might have on your roster. But first, check this out.
Introducing our new app, Draft Lane. Connect with us anytime for your start sit, waiver questions, and more. We can instantly access your roster and tell you the exact right moves to make. Access your past leagues and climb the Draft Lane leaderboard and see how you stack up against your competitors. Both Yahoo and Sleeper are supported. Download Draft Lane today and use the promo code ENDGAME to receive $10 in your account. Available on the App Store and Google Play.
All right, Thursday night, Vikings at the Eagles. A bunch of studs that you already know should be in your lineup. But there's also the rookie Jordan Addison for Minnesota. Did catch a touchdown in his debut. Do you think he can do something in this game?
It is a tough matchup, but also we just saw Kendrick Bourne have a nice game against this defense, so maybe the opportunities will be there. Definitely not a guy I feel like you have to start, but if you need him this week, I think he'll be okay.
Yeah, I can't go so far as to say must start, but I feel really good about his chances. I mean, he's going to benefit all year long from having Justin Jefferson over there. You know, they got big play Slay. He's going to be shadowing most likely or close to it, JJ. Addison has a good chance to get deep for a touchdown or collect a lot of targets. Again, I think that he's a really good start. And then there's KJ Osborne. Also got his share of targets, the same as Addison last week. Is he startable?
Yeah, I don't know. I just can't do it with KJ Osborne. I mean, maybe he scores a touchdown or something, but he just doesn't do it for me. I'm not starting him.
Yeah, he's not the kind of player you really want to roll out unless there's a bye week or something like that, and we're not there yet. So he's a bench player for now. Ravens at the Bengals. The debut of Zay Flowers was pretty impressive. Can he do a repeat?
I don't know if he can do a repeat, but I think he's a good start this week. This Bengals defense is good, but it's not a defense that should completely scare you. He looks like the number one wide receiver here. I think Zay Flowers is a good start.
Well, all I'll say is I regret not being more all in on him for week 1. I mean, I know he's not like it was a monster game, but he showed everything that I was hoping and expecting from him. He is number one guy there. I think he will be going forward. So I think he's a solid wide receiver 3 right now and just going forward. Rashad Bateman, not as involved. I mean, he still should get his share of targets, but are you starting him in Cincy?
No, I mean, this guy needs a home run. Complete desperation, not starting them.
Yeah, I'll say the fact that Flowers is already the top target there in terms of receivers means Bateman isn't. So he's a very kind of a fringe roster guy, honestly, at this point. So definitely not a guy you should start. And then there's OBJ, couple of catches, otherwise nothing spectacular. Do you think he gets better as the season goes on?
I mean, maybe. He did play a lot of snaps, but I mean, he's just going to be a guy that every now and then will do something, but you don't really want him in your lineup. I'm not starting him.
Yeah, look, to me, either he makes a big play, gets a touchdown, or he doesn't do much. So I don't want that kind of volatility in my lineup because the ceiling is just too low. And while you should definitely be starting Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, despite what happened in week 1, Tyler Boyd, is he a guy you consider?
Not really. It got to be in a super deep league for me to consider Tyler Boyd this week. I feel like we're going to see Chase and Higgins go off. Not starting Boyd.
Yeah, I pretty much lost all interest in Tyler Boyd after last season when, despite all the injuries at receiver, he still just didn't do much of anything. So he's a firm sit. Seahawks taking on the Lions. Let's start with DK Metcalf. Looked pretty good in week 1. Even if Geno Smith didn't look good in the second half of that game, how do you feel about him in this matchup?
Not as good as I did last week. The Lions defense, I'm telling you, they're going to be pretty good this year. They have a decent secondary. But I think DK Metcalf, like most weeks, will still be a solid start.
Metcalf's always going to be a solid start. Always has that upside. Yeah, Lions, interesting. They play a lot more zone. They could limit some of those big plays, but Metcalf could still make one of those big plays. Tyler Lockett, always a guy who could go off for a big game, but in the concussion protocol. So we'll have to see there. If he plays in this game, would you start him?
Yeah, Tyler Lockett to me is another guy, just like DK Metcalf. He can always hit a big play. He can always go off. He's a solid weekly start.
Yeah, same thing. These are guys, it's just hard to bench unless you have really a clearly superior option. And then there's Jackson Smith and Jigba. Maybe he could benefit if Lockett is out. It's too early to say that, but either way, how do you feel about JSN?
Still not great. I think we're going to feel good about him as the season goes on, but I'm not ready to do it yet. Still not starting him.
Going to agree. It's too early. Even if Lockett doesn't play or leaves the game early or something happens, don't feel a huge target share here, so I'm sitting JSN until further notice. And then opposite the Sun God is Josh Reynolds. Hey, he came out with 80 yards in week 1. Do you feel like he could be maybe a flex guy?
I think so. He looks like the clear number 2 target here. Not a guy I feel like you have to start, but like you said, as a flex, if you need him, you can start him.
Well, I mentioned him as a potential waiver wire pickup. More of a deep league option, though. I mean, there were several guys I'd rather pick up before him. So, I mean, if you're in a deep, like a 14 or 16 team league, you could roll him out. But otherwise, he's probably more just depth on your bench. Colts at the Texans. Let's start with Michael Pittman. Pretty nice debut for Anthony Richardson, and Pittman was definitely a guy who benefited. Do you feel like he's locked in as a solid start now?
I do. I mean, liked what I saw. This isn't a matchup that should scare you. I think Pittman is a solid start.
Yeah, against the Texans. Yeah, I mean, the only question I had was, could Richardson get him the ball? He did. And you saw what Pittman did after the catch with that long touchdown. So, yeah, Pittman I feel pretty good about now. Now let's talk Nico Collins. He put up some good numbers in week 1. Huge target share, a lot of air yards. It was all there, but maybe because of game script. Do you think that follows in week 2?
Probably not. This should be a much closer game. I don't see the Colts blowing out the Texans here, but Nico looked good. CJ Stroud looked pretty good. I think Nico, not a guy I'm going to say you have to start or a solid start or anything, but if you need him, he should get the job done.
I think I'm almost ready to elevate him to kind of every week wide receiver 3 status because, look, this is a guy that both you and I really liked as a late round sleeper in drafts, and everything was there for him. The target share, like I said, the air yards, everything. The game script, we'll see what happens, but look, I'm not scared of this Colts defense, so I say Nico is a solid start. Now, I can't quite go there with Robert Woods, even though he actually got about as many targets and actually I think more yards than Nico Collins. Do you feel good about Robert Woods?
I would never say I feel good about Robert Woods. I don't feel like he has the upside of Nico. But I think like in a deep league, if you need a floor play, he can probably give you that. So I'm going to say again, if you need him, you can start him.
Yeah, I feel like eventually he'll kind of give way to some of the younger receivers they have. But so far, I mean, look, he still looked kind of like vintage Bobby Trees. He's a decent flex play, but I'm not going to say that I prefer him as much as Nico Collins or over some other guys. And what about Tank Dell? There was that preseason connection with CJ Stroud. Do you think that develops this week?
This week, probably not. Over the season, maybe. I'm not starting Tank Dell.
Nah, I can't go with Tank Dell. Need to see much more out of him first. Bears at the Bucs. DJ Moore was pretty much taken out of the game by Jair Alexander. Now going against Tampa. Does he have a comeback kind of effort?
I really hope so. I will say one thing. This Bucs defense, we saw it last week. They give up some big plays. So there's going to be chances for him. But, man, this is not a fantastic matchup. But I think if you got DJ Moore, you got to roll him out again.
I'm still starting DJ Moore. I know it wasn't a great Bears debut, but I still believe in that connection. Not scared too much of Tampa's pass defense. I think he got DJ Moore. You go with him. Now, Darnell Mooney did catch a touchdown. He's the number 2 guy there. How do you feel about him?
I mean, if he scores a touchdown again, sure, but I'm not really banking on that again. I can't do it with Mooney yet. I like him as a sleeper this year, but putting him in my lineup in week 2 feels too much. I'm not starting him yet.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you there. I mean, not the worst start, not the best start. You're kind of not sure what to expect from this Bears passing game, honestly. So I think Mooney is a flex candidate. Let's put it that way. Mike Evans seemed to find a connection with Baker Mayfield. So how do you feel about him? Could he go maybe for the end zone a second week in a row?
Possibly. It's another good matchup against the Bears. I mean, Jordan Love just lit him up for 3 touchdowns. So I think Mike Evans, once again, like last week, is a solid start.
I think you have to consider him that because Mayfield seemed to look to him first and foremost. So always potential to score. This matchup, I say, yeah, you go with Evans if you got him. And then there's Chris Godwin. Same situation here. Do you think he can produce?
I'm going to say the same thing I'll probably say about Chris Godwin every week. I think he's a floor play. I think he'll be fine most weeks, but just a floor play.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this guy has a ton of talent. I will say Tampa Bay pass offense wasn't great, but it definitely was better than I had expected. Against the Bears, I think Godwin is a solid start too. All right, it's time to talk about that Chiefs wide receiver room. They're going to Jacksonville to take on the Jags. There's Sky Moore here. If you haven't dropped him already out of rage, what do you do with him?
Don't start him.
That seems pretty straightforward. I mean, you can't, can you? There's no way you can't get fooled a second time. What about, do I even ask, Kadarius Toney?
Yeah, I can't believe the Chiefs are starting Kadarius Toney. I'm definitely not starting Kadarius Toney.
Oh, no, there's absolutely no chance. Now, what about Rashee Rice? I mean, look, he scored. Maybe he gets a little bit more run if Toney gets less. I mean, maybe that's wishful thinking.
Yeah, wishful thinking here. He didn't do a whole lot outside of that touchdown. Travis Kelce probably going to play this week. Not starting Rashee Rice.
I think the lesson here is maybe we should just not trust any of the Chiefs receivers until further notice. So I'm not starting Rice. Now, some people might already be saying, how can you not call Calvin Ridley a no doubt must start? I mean, is he there yet?
I don't think he's quite there yet. I mean, look, you can't just one big game and all of a sudden they're an every week must start. But you had to be encouraged by what you saw from Calvin Ridley in week 1, and there's no way you could bench this guy. You basically have to start him.
I mean, it was a good matchup last week, and you saw how much he was targeted, how good he looked. It's a better matchup going against the Chiefs secondary. We know how much passing yard they give up. If they have Kelce, if the Chiefs actually score more this week, I mean, yeah, you have to start Ridley, and you have to be loving it if you did draft Ridley. Christian Kirk, not so much. I mean, probably one of the bigger busts from week 1. Does he have a redemption game?
I mean, he could. That's the thing about Christian Kirk. We saw this all year last year. He'd have these terrible games. Maybe he'd have 2 in a row, maybe 3 in a row, and then bang, 30 points the next week. In this matchup, I still would have a hard time benching him. Obviously, if you have better options, bench him, but I think he's still a good start this week.
I almost kind of went all in him and said, you know what, this is a game, the matchup, and they're going to go back to him. And then I thought better, and then also not just the fact that he has fooled us on multiple occasions, back to back, but also he was off the field a lot. When the Jags did go with a 2-receiver set, he was the guy who was sitting. So not getting as many looks, but also not as many snaps as last year. Maybe Ridley is hurting him, so I think he's a risky flex play at best. But then Zay Jones not only was better than Kirk, but was on the field more than Kirk. Still showing that connection with Trevor Lawrence. Is Zay Jones a good start?
I can't say he's a good start, but in this matchup, I think if you need to start him, he's definitely startable.
Well, I think if you have Zay Jones, you drafted him late, you might want to consider rolling him out. This could be a shootout, so I think he's a good flex play. Packers taking on the Falcons. So let's start with Christian Watson. Definitely still up in the air as to what's going to happen with him. If he's ready for week 2, do you put him in your lineup?
Yeah, unless it's one of these things where he doesn't practice all week and comes down to a game time decision. But in this matchup against the Falcons, if he plays, I'm playing him.
Yeah, I think if he's in there, even if they say, limited snaps. Well, you saw what Romeo Doubs did with limited snaps last week, caught 2 touchdowns. Watson's the kind of guy, if he's good to go, you play him. Unless, like you said, if it's like a game time decision or he's still questionable heading into Sunday, then you just don't risk it. Speaking of Doubs, looked good in limited time. Do you roll with him against the Falcons?
I think you have to, especially if Watson is out. I mean, he didn't even play full snaps last week. You got to think now he'll play way more snaps. It's a good matchup. I think Doubs is a good start this week.
Yeah, I mean, if Watson doesn't play, I think Doubs is probably wide receiver 3. I mean, it's a good matchup for him. And I wouldn't say that you have to go out of your way to start him, but if he's out there in waivers, you definitely need to pick him up this week. Did talk about Jaden Reed last week. Well, Caught a couple of passes. He also left the game for a bit with an injury. He should be fine. He should be out there. How do you feel about him with or without Watson?
Yeah, either way, I can't start him. I mean, thought he'd have a better game last week. Need to see it first, not starting him.
There's still potential here, but just might take a little bit of time, right? I mean, he is a rookie, so I like the idea of stashing him, but I'm not going to start him. And then what do we do with Drake London? Had the donut last week. What happens now?
This is so tough. We know he's a good player, but you always run the risk that this offense just goes through the running game. This isn't going to be a game where they're blowing them out like they did last week, so I think they will have to throw more. But will enough of those passes go to Drake London? Look, maybe this will be like a Devonta Smith thing where week 1 he was terrible, then week 2 he was awesome, and he was awesome rest of the season, but I don't know if I can do it this week. Let me see him get targeted first. I think I have to sit him this week.
I think my concern here is less so much of the game script or whether you're going to pass, but also it's look what happened to DJ Moore last week against the Packers. Jair Alexander pretty much shut him down. I could see that happening with London too, so very risky. Maybe give it another week before you roll him out. Raiders will be taking on the Bills. Well, what about Jacoby Myers, who had a huge game, but then left the game with a concussion and kind of scary hit there? If he does play, does he look like a strong start?
I don't know if I can say a strong start against the Bills, but obviously Jimmy G trusts him and he's going to target him. So I'm going to put him in that, flex if you need kind of guy.
Yeah, we don't want to, get carried away from last week's stats. Obviously, the target share is encouraging. If he's a full go, you got to feel fairly good about him. And look, I don't like the defensive matchup, but I like the potential for the Raiders having to pass because they're playing Buffalo. So I think I consider him a pretty good flex option. And then if, and probably only if, Myers doesn't suit up, what about Hunter Renfrow, who actually didn't even get targeted last week?
Yeah, even if Myers is out, I can't put Hunter Renfrow in my lineup.
Yeah, one of these guys that you know his name because he was good a couple of years ago and got some buzz this preseason again, but let's see it, right? Let's see him do something first. You can't start Renfrow. And then there's Gabe Davis, the man of mystery. We never know what we're going to get from him. What do you think we'll get from him against the Raiders?
Well, this is the week you want to start him. We said don't start him last week against the Jets. Tough matchup, but this is the Raiders. Easy matchup. If he's going to have a big game, this is it. Not a must start, but I think, a good upside play.
Well, there's definitely the upside. There's also the downside. Look, if you are shooting for that upside and you feel lucky, I say go with him if you need it. All right, Chargers taking on the Titans. This looks like it could be an opportunity to feast for these receivers. Let's start with Keenan Allen. Against Tennessee, you kind of have to, don't you?
Yeah, you got to start Keenan Allen against Tennessee. They couldn't stop any of the receivers on the Saints last week. They're not going to stop Keenan Allen. Start him.
Yeah, absolutely. Have to start Keenan Allen this week. Mike Williams, not a big game last week, but, still, the matchup, right? I think you got to roll with him too.
Yeah, I actually expect a very big Mike Williams game this week. I am starting him everywhere.
And then there's DeAndre Hopkins. Got a lot of attention from Ryan Tannehill. Not huge results, though. This case, going against the Chargers, which way do you think it'll go?
I think it'll be like it is most weeks. A floor play. He'll get the targets. He'll have the catches. Not a big ceiling. He's a fine start as a floor play.
Look, most weeks, I'm not going to get too excited about the Titans offense in general, but also necessarily D-Hop. But I'm feeling it this week. I think that I'm encouraged by the target share. I like the matchup. I think things fall into place. I think this week, I'm definitely starting Hopkins. Treylon Burks, well, that's a different story. I think Hopkins' presence definitely affected him. Is he a flex candidate even?
Not for me right now. I barely even want to start Hopkins. I can't start Treylon Burks.
I like Burks, but even though I think he could do some things in this matchup, I'm not willing to put him in my lineup. Niners at the Rams. People want to know, after week 1, is Brandon Ayuk the number 1 guy in San Francisco?
Some week I think it's still going to be him and Debo, but he's a vertical guy. He's the down the field guy, the more traditional kind of X receiver. Look, you're not benching Brandon Ayuk. You're starting Brandon Ayuk.
No, and it's not just because we're expecting a repeat from last week, but he can do this any given week, and he's one of those guys you just are afraid to put on your bench because you never know when he'll go off. And this Rams defense doesn't scare me, so I'm definitely starting Brandon Ayuk. Deebo Samuel, doesn't fit into the no doubt must start category anymore, but he's still got to be a strong start as well.
Yeah, in this matchup, I feel like Deebo always has huge games against the Rams. I think he's a very good start.
Yeah, I think you have to keep him locked in there for sure. All right, it's time. Let's talk Puka. That's right, Puka Nacua, the rookie out of BYU, a 5th-round pick. Is he the new Cooper Kupp?
Well, we're going to find out because this is a brutal matchup against the 49ers, one of the best defenses in the NFL. Like, I know you might have grabbed him off waivers, spent some fab on him, but I can't do it personally unless I was desperate. I can't start him this week against the 49ers.
Look, I get grabbing off waivers. That's smart. Like, that makes sense. But hopefully it wasn't because you needed him to start at your wide receiver 3 or flex spot. If it was a different matchup, maybe, but I'm going to agree with you. Let's just make sure this wasn't a one-game wonder before we're putting him in over a better receiver. And then Van Jefferson, well, he didn't do the things we thought he would do. Does he have any value here?
No, at least Puka was getting targets. Van Jefferson against 49ers, no chance.
Yeah, maybe it's a little early to say this, but maybe it's just not really ever going to happen for Van Jefferson, at least not from a fantasy standpoint. Giants taking on the Cardinals. Let's just put it this way. Is there anybody in this Giants wide receiver core even worth considering?
No, you have to be really desperate. I'm not starting any Giants wide receiver right now.
It's the matchup really doesn't even matter. It's like there's some guys you don't have to think about. You're definitely starting. There's some teams where you don't have to think about. You definitely don't want a piece of this passing offense right now. Cardinals not much better, but hey, Hollywood Brown is a good player. Do you have interest in him against looked like a terrible Giants defense?
No, I don't think the defense is as bad as they looked. It was more the offense was so bad that the defense kind of was put in bad positions. But it's going to be hard for me to start Hollywood Brown until Kyler Murray comes back, so no.
Yeah, I'm really not changing my tune, even though the matchup isn't as bad as last week on paper. I don't want a piece of this offense if I can help it, so I would rather sit Hollywood Brown. That also goes for Rondale Moore. He did catch a couple of passes last week. Do you think he could do anything?
Maybe catch a couple passes, but is that worth starting? No.
Jets taking on the Cowboys. All right, what about Brandon Cooks? Not a lot in his Dallas debut, but that's because they really didn't need to pass it. Do you think that he can overcome this matchup with the Jets?
No, I'm not starting Brandon Cooks against the Jets. No, thank you.
I'm keeping faith in him long term. This is not the game to do that, though. It's just such a tough matchup, so sit Brandon Cooks for now. Michael Gallup, more of a vertical threat. Do you think he can do anything?
Probably not. Hard pass on Michael Gallup.
Yeah, you kind of would need to convince yourself that there's a reason to start Michael Gallup, and playing the Jets is a pretty good reason, so no. And then you might have noticed Garrett Wilson not in the must-start category because it doesn't look like he'll have Aaron Rodgers as his quarterback anymore. That's right. It's probably good old Zach Wilson again. So, what do we expect?
Pain. We've seen this before. It doesn't end well. Maybe we get lucky and they bring somebody else in, but man, you can't feel good. I think you probably still have to start Garrett Wilson. It's not like he was, awful last year with Zach Wilson, but the ceiling is gone, but he's still a guy you probably have to start.
I guess you do have to start him because he's so talented, even though, Zach Wilson. And then on the road against the Cowboys, expect disappointment, I guess, and anything he gives you will just be a bonus. Hard to sit him unless you really do have good enough options to replace him. Commanders at the Broncos this week. Start with Terry McLaurin, who did play, but didn't do much in week 1. Does he do any better here?
Against the Broncos, Patrick Surtain, no thank you. I'm not starting Terry McLaurin this week.
We thought that both he and Dotson could smash. Didn't happen against Arizona. And now we're talking about the Denver defense and Pat Surtain, one of the best corners in the league. Not only do I not want to start Terry McLaurin, I'm also jumping all over his pick'em in underdog lower than 51.5 yards. He was in the 20s last week. Look, maybe that toe feels a little bit better, but it's clear he's not 100%, probably not ready to have a big game. And in this matchup, I can definitely say I feel good sitting him and taking the lower. Don't forget that if you combine picks like your Godwin pick, my McLaurin pick, any of the running backs we talk about, you can put those all together on Underdog for their weekly pick'ems, and you can even do their in-game live pick'ems and get up to 20 times your bet. So check that out now. And of course, if you're new to Underdog, don't forget, sign up, use code ENDGAME to get your 100% deposit match up to $100. So then there's also Jahan Dotson. Didn't smash in week 1 either. Do you think he does any better?
I mean, probably not. It's a tough matchup, but I actually feel better about him than Terry because he's probably not going to see a whole lot of Patrick Surtain. Might even be in that Jacoby Myers role. So not a guy I'm going to say you have to start because of the matchup, but I think if you need him, you can start him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say he's a hard bench like Terry, but I also can't feel great about him. So only start if you don't feel good about your other options. And would it really be surprising now after last week if Curtis Samuel leads his team in receiving? Because he did last week, and he's probably going to be playing in the slot a lot, like Jacoby Myers. I mean, can you start Samuel?
I can't do it. In this matchup, Sam Howell, no thanks.
I wonder how much Samuel's even rostered in fantasy leagues. So if you got him, no, I mean, he's just depth. You can't start him. Jerry Jeudy was questionable last week, so it seems like there's a good chance he does play in week 2. If he's out there, how good would you feel about him?
I mean, I wouldn't feel great about him. This isn't, the best matchup. The Commanders have a good defense, but I think as wide receiver 3 flex type, he's fine.
I'm not doing it because, this is an injury that could kind of bother him. We don't know if he's really going to be 100%. I'm just not excited in any way about this Denver passing offense. I think I've seen enough. Not a good matchup. I'd rather keep him benched. And I guess the same goes for Courtland Sutton. Look, I know he scored last week, but, man, I just don't feel like I can rely on whatever he's going to give me. So I'd rather keep him benched if I could afford to.
Yeah, I'll say if Jeudy plays, I don't really want to start Sutton. But if Judy's out again, I think, again, he's okay as a flex type start, but that's it.
Miami taking on New England. You're starting both the top receivers in Miami. In New England, I'm not sure really who is their top receiver, but I guess it's Kendrick Bourne based on last week. Do you think that he can do something to be fantasy relevant for a second straight week?
He might have to in this game against Miami, but do I really want to gamble on that? I don't. I'm not starting them.
Miami's secondary not great without Jalen Ramsey, and they did give up some points, but yeah, this is a deep league option only. You could flex him if you're feeling lucky, but I'd prefer not to. And then there's Juju, who I guess is still on the Patriots. I had to check the box score. He's still there. Do you think he's fantasy relevant?
No, hard pass on Juju.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. We can pass on Juju. Saints will be taking on the Panthers. Let's start with Michael Thomas. Made it through a game, still intact, did get targeted. Derek Carr looked good. Is he a guy that you feel like you have to start?
Definitely not. He was third on the team in receiving. He stayed healthy. Derek Carr looked good, but that was the Titans. This is a tougher matchup. He's like a floor play. If you need him, you can start him.
Yeah, here's the thing. I feel like we're still not getting the Michael Thomas we remember. This is a different Michael Thomas, and I think he's okay as a floor play, but not your best option. You mentioned Rashid Shaheed did get more action than Michael Thomas. He's that deep threat. Do you think that he's worth considering if you did just pick him up?
Desperation, upside play only. Look, it was the Titans last week. It was a great matchup. This, not quite as much. On the road, don't like Shaheed as much. Just a desperation start.
Yeah, I feel like he's kind of like this year's version of a Gabe Davis, who it's going to be a boom bust, right? He might score a long touchdown. He might not do much. He's going to be one of those volatile flex types. So you can roll him out and see what you get, but just be prepared for anything. And then for the Panthers, Adam Thielen, well, he's there. Didn't do a whole lot. You think he'll do anything this week?
No, how much longer do we have to talk about Adam Thielen for before people just give up? Not starting him.
No, I don't think you can start him. What about the rookie Jonathan Mingo? Ran a lot of routes last week. Do you think that he can do something?
Probably not. Let me see it first. Rookie QB, rookie wide receiver, need to see it.
Well, that and this New Orleans pass defense is pretty good, so there's no way. I mean, realistically, we shouldn't be starting any of these Panthers receivers, but if DJ Chark does come back and play, would you consider him?
No.
All right, there you go. And then Monday night, we got the Browns at the Steelers. Amari Cooper, he let you down last week. Do you think he does it again this week?
I don't. I like Amari Cooper this week. This is a much better matchup. I mean, look what Brandon Ayuk just did to the Steelers. I think we see a better Amari Cooper. I'm starting him.
Yeah, still one of those guys. So hard to bench. You'd have to have a really good reason. I don't think the Steelers defense is that reason. So you got to start Cooper. And then what about Elijah Moore? Technically was the leader in receiving for the Browns last week. Is he a flex candidate?
I think so. I think if you need him, you can flex him.
There you go. Not a must start, but I think he can be started for sure. And then actually it was Donovan Peoples-Jones who was on the field the most out of all wide receivers in terms of snap count. Does he have fantasy value?
Not really, because, I mean, he plays the X role, so he's out there all the time, but he kind of feels like MVS to me, like one of these guys who, yeah, you look at the snap share and you're like, that's great, but then you look at the target share and you're like, that's not so great, so not starting him.
Yeah, he's out there, but not enough targets. Can't do it. This is a little too much of a reach at this point of the season. And then let's talk George Pickens. Does that make Pickens must start?
No, because we saw in that game last week when Deontay was out, it wasn't George Pickens that got the bump. It was Allen Robinson. Yeah, Pickens in this matchup against his secondary, I'm not feeling a big Pickens game. I know it'd probably be hard to bench Pickens because he can always have a huge play, but man, I'd have a hard time doing it. Desperation flex play.
I'd say you could flex him. Again, just be prepared to see another ugly performance from the Steelers offense. And then believe it or not, we're talking Allen Robinson. He actually led the Steelers in receiving in week 1. And look, if Deontay's out, maybe he does even more. What do you think?
I can't believe it's week 2 and we're talking about Allen Robinson. I'm not starting Allen Robinson.
It can't go there, can it? Can we really be at that point already? We shouldn't be. No. Now you know which wide receivers should be in or out of your lineup. But what about running backs? You definitely need to know which way to go. Check this out. We break down all the matchups and all the running backs that matter.